Hello, I'm Koala. I'm gonna drink more beer and talk about more comic books. Today I'm drinking Ninkasi Renew Ale. It's a seasonal release. It's very wintry. It's brewed in Oregon. My friend Ollie bought it for me. I guess you could say in a way he's sponsoring the video today, so thank you for that. Today we're gonna talk about Spider-Man 700. But Koala, why are you talking about Spider-Man 700? That came out like 4 months ago. Almost 5 months ago. I'll tell you why. Because I freaking love this book. If you haven't read it, turn off the video, go freaking buy it, read it, and then come back and watch the video. If you have read it, or don't care about spoilers, go ahead and keep listening. And honestly, it came out like 4 months ago. So if you don't already know that Dr. Octopus switched brains with Peter Parker, and then Peter Parker dies in Dr. Octopus's body, leaving Dr. Octopus to be the new Spider-Man in Peter Parker's body, it's kind of too late for me to save you from that reality. We're also going to be taking a look at the first 5 or so issues of the new Spider-Man series, Superior Spider-Man, because the two of them basically lead into each other. Anyway, I want to tell you why I love Spider-Man 700, as well as why I love the new Superior Spider title even more, because holy fuck, Superior Spider-Man is like my favorite comic that's happening right now. The guy who writes these books, Dan Slott, the man is a genius. Thank you, Dan Slott, for writing this book so that I can read it and tell all my friends about it, even though they probably don't give a shit anyway. When I first read Spider-Man 700, I was like, it was maybe the first time I read a comic book and it was just like magic. I love this book so much that I bought it like 1, 2, 3, a whole bunch of times. Now, when I was first introduced to Spider-Man, I was like 5, so you could say I kind of grew up with Spider-Man. And then I was like a teenager and the first movie came out and I was like blown away. Then the second movie came out and I was like even more blown away. And I really feel like people don't give Spider-Man 2 enough credit because goddamn, when that movie came out, it was the best superhero movie that had came out until that point. I mean, you watch it now and it's pretty corny. But back then, people fucking shit their pants over this movie. I swear to God. I remember. I was there. Then Spider-Man 3 came out. We don't have to talk about that. Anyway, Spider-Man has pretty much always been a part of my life. So when I started buying comic books, and I saw all these advertisements about the final issue of Amazing Spider-Man, needless to say, I wanted in on this spider action. And when I read it, I was enraptured. On one hand, I felt like it was blasphemy that they killed Peter Parker, but after I thought about it, I loved the idea. Because Doc Ock has always been one of my favorite supervillains. I loved his arms. His crazy freaking arms. And Dr. Octopus, you know, he's been there since basically the beginning of Spider-Man. He's like the oldest Spider-Man villain that's still around. So it's kind of poetic in a way that at the end of Amazing Spider-Man, of the final issue, he's the one that kills Peter Parker. It kind of comes full circle, if you know what I mean. And in the end, because he has all Parker's memories, he completely understands him as a human being. And he's in a really interesting position now. He actually has to be Spider-Man. So, in a way, Dr. Octopus Spider-Man has to learn the lesson of responsibility and power just like the real Peter Parker did. And in the pages of Superior Spider-Man, we see him learning these lessons in a very modern and relevant way. Maybe an even more relevant way than the way Peter Parker could teach the modern comic book audience of today. I'm going to tell you why this move is relevant and valuable in the comic book world, and not some chic shock value ending that they just threw into the last pages of Amazing Spider-Man. First of all, people who have been reading Spider-Man for a long time have an opportunity to read a fresh take on the character that's been around for 50 years. For newer readers, people who have never been into superheroes beyond maybe TV shows or movies, people that were like me, we get to see progress in a world with the characters that we love. Because growing up, these stories seemed kind of static to me. When I was watching Spider-Man and growing up, It was apparent to me that Spider-Man was never going to be defeated, because if he was, there wouldn't be a show. Reading Spider-Man 700 shows readers that the universe of comic books is not a static universe, and there are lasting consequences to the actions of the characters. And even though they're probably going to bring the real Peter Parker back at some point, he is dead right now. And from what I can see, he won't be coming back, at least in a human form, for a while now, which makes his death real, at least for the time being. And as we watch Doc Ock learn these lessons of power and responsibility, it's almost as if we're right there in Peter Parker's head with him. Because Doc Ock being Spider-Man isn't just Doc Ock being Spider-Man. The situation is symbolic of the reader living out their fantasy of being Spider-Man as well. You might be saying, Koala, what are you talking about? Just hear me out on this. If you take a good look at Dan Slott, the guy who writes Spider-Man, you see fat, middle-aged, bald guy. And if you look at classic Dr. Octopus, you kind of see a similarity between the two. When I see Doc Ock being Spider-Man, a part of me sees Dan Slott living out his ultimate fantasy of being Spider-Man, because the man loves Spider-Man. Anybody who's read a Spider-Man book has wanted to be Spider-Man. No one who reads any superhero book never thinks, man, I would never want to have this guy's superpowers. If they thought that way, people wouldn't read comic books. They'd read non-fiction books, or the newspaper, or math textbooks, or maybe they just wouldn't read at all. You see, because we're all flawed human beings. We can relate to Doc Ock dealing with being Spider-Man because he's also imperfect and makes flawed, arguably non-moral decisions that we ourselves would make. We've all seen how Peter Parker handles situations over the years. He sort of stands for this ultimate moral good now. Sure, he makes mistakes, and that's part of the reason we love him. But his heart is always in the right place. And that's the other reason we love him. And in that way, Peter Parker, at this point in time, has kind of become a static character. In Superior Spider-Man, he's like a ghost, watching Doc Ock live out his life and basically fuck up everything that he stood for as Spider-Man. So because Doc Ock is a flawed and very human character trying to be good, and Peter Parker's always looking over his shoulder, we get this sort of Pinocchio situation. Essentially, Peter Parker is like the Jiminy Cricket of this story. And we, as the reader, can relate to this, because even when we make really hard decisions in life, we still have an idea of what the right thing to do is. This is why Doc Ock being Spider-Man represents an extremely human mindset, because he has very sound reasoning for all his actions, even though his decisions may not always be morally right. Example, in issue 5, Doc Ock makes the decision to kill Massacre, a mass murderer who's killed his fair share of innocent people. Is this perhaps the moral right thing to do? Probably not, but it's a decision with sound reasoning behind it. And Ghost Peter Parker is there as Doc Ock makes this arguably more human decision. This is all to say that maybe Doc Ock is a better representation of our modern views of justice than Peter Parker would be. And that's what makes the idea of the Superior Spider-Man so relevant and interesting. There you have it. So, if you love Spider-Man, and you love comic books, and you love beer, thumbs up the video, subscribe to my channel, and I'll be back next week to drink more beer and talk about more comic books.